Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. We are 1 week away from the start of training camp. 1 week and 1 day, I believe it is. I think it's next Tuesday. It kicks off, maybe Wednesday, whatever. It's next week, though, and I'm really excited. We have finally made it through that dead part of the offseason, and now we've got one more Hard Knocks episode and a little bit other news, and then boom, Giants and Jets taking the practice field next week. It's really exciting times.
Absolutely. Things you love to see. Football is back. Are you going to get in? I don't know. Are you much of a gamer? Are you in on this new college football game coming out?
You know, I don't care too much for college football, to be completely honest. Like, I watch a lot more NFL, and I only really follow college football around the draft. But there was so much hype surrounding this game, and one of my college buddies is obsessed, and he was like, you have to get it. Non-negotiable. You have to get it so that we could start a dynasty league together, whatever that means. So I pre-ordered it last night. I'll be playing that next week, just to accommodate my friend, basically.
There you go. Love that. My gaming days are long gone. So I don't foresee myself getting in on this game, but it is exciting because I know it's been long awaited for almost a decade since the last game came out. So excited for that. And as you said, excited for training camp, man, which starts next week. And it is like the home stretch of like the ranking season. So ESPN, we've talked about them for the different positional rankings so far. But today, ESPN dropped the rankings for quarterbacks. Now that's executive scouts and coaches to rank their top 10 at each position. And coming in at number 8 is number 8, Aaron Rodgers on the list. I was pleasantly surprised with that ranking. I think it's a fair ranking for him. I'll pull up the rest of that list as well. We can discuss. But what was your overall reaction when you saw that pop out this morning?
Honestly, I think it's maybe a little bit high, but it's definitely fair. I think that for Aaron Rodgers, it's a much better ranking than the one that we discussed, the clutch quarterback one that we discussed recently with him not being up there. And then I believe earlier in the offseason, we discussed one where he was outside of the top 10. I don't think it was from ESPN, but some other outlet. So I guess it's good to see that around the league, there's still confidence in Aaron Rodgers, and there's still executives, scouts, and coaches that feel as though he could potentially return to that MVP level form. And I think that it's always important when they do these rankings, because it's coming from the inside of the NFL, to realize that it's not just media hype driving the New York Jets. Like, there are a lot of doubters in the media. There's a lot of supporters in the media, but there's also people inside the league that see what a lot of us see. The Jets have a really good roster led by one of the best quarterbacks of all time. They are absolutely a threat this season.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring up in this conversation is, whether it's NFL pundits, media members, like there's some who very clearly they don't like Aaron Rodgers, and whatever, that's fine. But I think around the league, this shows that, Rodgers is still a respected guy. Sure, he's not, top 3 like he was, for so long for the majority of his career. But even after missing a full season, if they're still looking at him as a top 10 quarterback, I think that kind of just speaks to, again, the ceiling of this Jets team. Rodgers and his health is going to be the number one deciding factor, in my opinion, on how far this Jets team goes. And if the Jets get anywhere close to top 10 quarterback play from Aaron Rodgers and he plays 15, 16, 17 games this year, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that they're not going to be, that they'll be a playoff team and a team to be, reckoned with come January.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to what we mentioned in a recent episode about how this team was able to win as many games as it did last year with Zach Wilson and some other quarterbacks under center. And they showed a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, but really they were missing a quarterback. That was obvious and apparent when you watched any Jets game last year. There was one piece of the puzzle, big piece of the puzzle that was missing. And if they get that piece of the puzzle back and healthy this year, being Aaron Rodgers, if they get even league average quarterback play, they were dealing with league worst quarterback play last year. So you give them league average quarterback play. Yeah, absolutely. This is a playoff team. And if they're getting really good quarterback play out of Aaron Rodgers, they're not only a playoff team, but they are a deep playoff team. They should be contending to go all the way, which is, of course, what New York Jets fans really want to hear and see. So, yeah, I'm totally up there with you. I think that if you get even average quarterback play out of Aaron Rodgers, this is a team that threatens to make a really deep postseason run.
Yeah, exactly. And even if he ends up dropping a few spots and is, closer to 16, which is exactly middle of the pack, like I think that's still good enough. Again, it kind of just, however, to whatever level he plays, like if it's top half of the league, I think playoff team for sure. Top 10, really dangerous team could make a run. And if it's MVP level, then like I think the Super Bowl aspirations and could be a reality for this football team. It's really exciting stuff for a fan base that has gone 13 years without making the playoffs. A lot of bad offenses, a lot of bad quarterback play over that time. I talked about it in a video on my own channel earlier this morning. Like, I don't know if Jet fans are ready to see what that's going to look like, going from Zach Wilson or Trevor Siemian or Tim Boyle to, even in years past with, Sam Darnold or Joe Flacco, Mike White. You go through the list of guys. They've dealt with bottom 5 quarterback play for nearly the entirety of their playoff drought here. So I don't know, like fans might build him a statue if he eclipses 3,500 passing yards this year. It's just not something that we're used to.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I can't really. I don't know if I've ever seen elite quarterback play in my lifetime for the New York Jets, but we've actually got that rare opportunity to finally see it here if Aaron Rodgers can just play anything like his former self at all. And, there's at least going to be a few games throughout the season where he does flash that potential and show that talent that he's always had. So even if you just have a couple of those games where he looks like vintage Aaron Rodgers, if they come at the right time in the season, that's difference making. If it's against a division rival when you need a win, maybe against the Bills, there you go. That's the difference between being a middle of the road team and being a top contending team in the postseason. So I don't know if Jets fans are ready for it because it's been so long. I think the best quarterback play that I've ever seen from the New York Jets is probably Mark Sanchez. And well, that's not exactly the highest bar to jump over there. So the Sanchez days are long gone. And now we're entering the new era of Aaron Rodgers.
He did have that one Ryan Fitzpatrick year in 2015.
Oh, true.
They won 10 games. That flash in the pan that quickly went off the rails the last game of the year and in 2016. But the Jets just tweeted this out as we went live. 8 weeks until week 1, the Jets, the Monday night game. So 8 weeks away from the first game of the season. Again, kind of just adding to the hype. It really feels like we're in the home stretch heading into this football season, Anthony.
Yeah, and we really are. I mean, 8 weeks, 2 months, it's right around the corner. Like I said, I mean, the 2 months that we just went through, this slow period of the offseason, flew by completely. This next 2 months, now that we have practices and preseason games going on, that's going to absolutely fly by. Like once training camp starts, it's pretty much just right there. It goes so quickly, and then the regular season is there before you even realize it. And I just can't wait for football again. Whether we're talking practice next week for the Giants and the Jets, and we're just seeing the slow motion Aaron Rodgers and Tommy DeVito dimes on the practice field. Super hyped for those. But then very shortly after that, we're seeing Tommy DeVito dot up the opposing teams in the preseason. We're maybe getting a glimpse of Aaron Rodgers in the Jets uniform again in the preseason, rather, if he does suit up once again this year. So it's right around the corner, and I couldn't be more excited.
I can't wait for it. And something you mentioned that I wanted to touch on before we get to the first Giants topic of the day. You mentioned where there might be some games where you need Aaron Rodgers to be that Aaron Rodgers of old. And I agree with that. I think and you were essentially alluding to this. I think more often than not, the Jets are going to be a team that leans on Breece Hall a lot in the run game and kind of just, dominating at the line of scrimmage and, playing great defense, hogging the ball, eating the clock, closing games out in the second half. But I don't think they don't need 17 games of Aaron Rodgers being a hero. But as you mentioned, in tight divisional games, or they play, Houston in prime time, or even in week 1 against San Francisco. Like, them, it's going to come down to needing a handful of plays a game from your quarterback. And if Rodgers can kind of, show flashes of still being that guy and making the clutch play, or, changing the play call at the line of scrimmage and putting themselves in a good spot, that's really where I think we see the difference. Is maybe not like, again, expecting him to throw 45 passes a game, rack up 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, but turning it on when needed.
Yeah, and that's just like the clutch factor of the top quarterbacks, right? And that's why, once again, we were talking about the recent rankings of most clutch quarterbacks. Again, Aaron Rodgers not being on there. When you're talking about players who make plays when they need to, I mean, you could think over the last 10, 15 years, there's so many Aaron Rodgers moments that stand out. Like that one playoff game against, I think it was Dallas, when he threw that back shoulder to Devontae Adams. That's just one of many plays. How about when he threw against Dallas again to Jared Cook on the sideline? Like, this is what Aaron Rodgers does. He shows up in those big moments. So, again, reemphasizing how ridiculous those rankings were, but then also just kind of putting it into a vacuum and saying that this Jets team, if they get those clutch moments out of Aaron Rodgers, you could see this magical run where the stars just align, and this team has been yearning for good quarterback play for years and years, and they've been on this dry spell for 50 plus years, and championship contenders very few and far between their seasons in their franchise history. Rodgers has that special stuff, and if he can just emulate any of the moments that he's had in the past and just elevate his team and will them to a couple of very clutch wins this season, again, the sky really is the limit for what's shaping up to be one of the best rosters on paper in the NFL.
Before we transition here, I want to pull the list back up for a second. Any major gripes for you? I mean, it doesn't have to be the Aaron Rodgers thing, but just anything from this list stand out to you in either being right or wrong? I know you're a Purdy guy, so you probably have him much higher.
I think Purdy should be on there. I think Dak should be a little bit higher, and I think Justin Herbert should be lower. That's probably what I would say. I think you can switch Dak and Herbert right there. I think you can take Goff off the list and put Purdy right in there, and then you've got the perfect list for the most part.
Yeah, I think I'm essentially with you. I think I'm a little bit higher on Justin Herbert than you are, and I'm okay with where Purdy is. I think he's just outside the top 10 for me, but I would move Goff back and maybe Kirk Cousins higher. I think he's a little bit low for where he is. I think Cousins and Dak are in a very similar tier for me, but honestly, the top 8 is pretty close to how I would have it. So I don't have very many gripes with this list.
Honestly, yeah, it's a pretty good list. I think it's semantics when you're debating, should Burrow be 2, should Allen be 2, should Jackson be 2, right? Like, that's all semantics. I'm happy that Matthew Stafford ranked that highly, though. Yeah. Matt Stafford is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated players, not just in the league, but in NFL history. Like, this guy never gets his flowers, it feels like. He's getting them here. He totally deserves them. He's a Super Bowl champion for a reason. And yeah, him being there on the top 5 is pretty awesome to see. I know a lot of people probably have issues with that, again, because he doesn't get the respect that he deserves. But other than that, it's a good looking list. And also, one other takeaway that I had, it really does highlight in some ways the strength of quarterbacks in the NFL right now, and kind of the thinness of quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Because when you get to these fringe top 10 players on here, like you get to these honorable mentions with Tua and Trevor Lawrence and stuff, like these guys are contending for top 10 quarterbacks in the league. I think it does show how important it is to find that elite quarterback in the NFL, and how it is very difficult to have a really solid quarterback and a stable quarterback position as an NFL team.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like, there's guys, as you mentioned, like Tua is a perfect example, right outside the top 10, and the Dolphins are looking at, like, do we pay him? Do we not? Like, I think there's no question he's a top half of the league guy, but how much better than that is really the debate. So I'm with you. I think it's a good list. And speaking of lists, we can get to the Giants one, where Andrew Thomas, your guy, comes in at number 8 on the tackle list. What was your takeaway from that?
My takeaway from that is that it's fair for now. I think he went down one spot. Last year he was OT7. He went down a spot, and it's fair because of injuries. Andrew Thomas is one of the most talented offensive linemen in the NFL. There's no question. When he is fully healthy and playing at his best, he's not only an elite blindside protector, but he's also an absolutely elite mauler in the running game. There were times during the 2022 season where the Giants were using this guy as one of their offensive weapons. Like, they were putting together rushing plays where they were moving Andrew Thomas out into space and asking him to make the play for Daniel Jones or for Saquon Barkley, whoever was the ball carrier. Like, he's an absolute weapon in both facets of the game. He really is. This offense does not work the same way without him in it. But unfortunately, they didn't have him in the lineup for 7 weeks last season. And the season prior, yes, he was fully healthy. I think he missed one game, but he was also hobbled by the end of the year with an ankle injury, and same in his rookie season and the year prior. So there's just been a bunch of little injuries that have held him back from reaching his full potential. So having him at number 8 and then reading the context of what was written in the article, there was an anonymous AFC executive that said he has the upside to be the top guy. He could be the kind of the guy that Trent Williams is right now. That's what the AFC executive said. And I totally do agree with that. And I see that potential, but it's been injuries that have just held him back from reaching that full potential. And if he does stay healthy this year and he dominates, yeah, maybe we're talking about him being OT 1, 2, or 3. But right now, I do think that OT 8 is pretty fair.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one also. I think like maybe you could make the case for him a couple, like a spot or two higher, but I can't go that much further than that with, you know, the current makeup of this list and where these guys are. I think if he didn't miss 7 games last year, maybe he's higher on this list. But as you said, I think he has the potential to be right there with Trent Williams. When healthy, he's one of the best left tackles in the NFL. He's still, you know, a really like young, exciting player. He's entering his prime now. Offensive lineman usually takes a few years anyway before they reach their fullest potential. I wanted to pull up his age. Yeah, he's still 25. He doesn't turn 26 until January, so he's still 25 years or younger. Like, this is a no doubt about it franchise left tackle. It's just a matter of how high up on this list could he go, and I think it's going to really come down to health for him this year.
It is. It's purely coming down to health because the talent and the ability is 100% there. With Andrew Thomas, it's just going to be, can he stay healthy? And that's really it. And I know on the ESPN article, there were some rankings. Someone had him as the number 1 tackle in the league because they show you where his highest ranking was and where his lowest. Others didn't have him in the top 10, but someone had him, at least one person had him as the number 1 offensive tackle in the NFL. And you can see that potential. You can see him absolutely becoming the top guy in the league. But again, it really isn't a question of ability. It's a question of availability. And that so often is the case with many of the league's top players, whether you're talking about offensive tackles, quarterbacks, especially wide receivers, even. If you're not on the field and you can't reach your full potential, you're not going to get the respect that you deserve. But for Andrew Thomas, who's really proven to be one of the best pass blocking and run blocking offensive tackles in the NFL, it's just about staying healthy. And this Giants offense can't succeed without him. That was made abundantly clear this past season. When he wasn't on the field, it was a train wreck. He's the best offensive tackle that the Giants have had in my lifetime, easily, for the last 20 years. And when he's on the field, this offense just works in a completely different way.
I mean, even your GM said it. Daniel Jones could have been Patrick Mahomes last year if he had Andrew Thomas at left tackle. That's a little bit of a stretch from me, but he did have that Patrick Mahomes comment, which had to throw that dig in there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I'm that one really upset me. As I said previously, that quote from Joe Shane is one that I'm not crazy about, but in some ways there is a hint of truth to it where, you know, this offense looks one way with and without Andrew Thomas, and taking Mahomes out of the equation, Daniel Jones would undisputably find more success in the offense with Andrew Thomas protecting his blind side versus the revolving door of Josh Azidu, Justin Pugh, and whoever else was taking over at left tackle for the Giants last year.
Peter's hanging out with us. He says popping in while out in the brutal July heat. Yeah, it's been a little rough. I don't know how these guys are going to do it at practice next week because, like, I'm seeing temperatures in the upper 80s and 90. I know it's not quite that Florida heat that you're used to, but the humidity and heat isn't great right now in the New York, New Jersey area too.
Yeah, right now I'm dealing with 88 degrees here in South Florida. Very humid for sure. Step outside and feel like you're suffocating and melting. But it's often hitting at least 92, 94 here pretty much every day. It's really freaking hot. It's not a lot of fun, but thank God for air conditioning. I have been hanging out inside and watching some good movies and avoiding this Florida heat for sure.
Good on you, man. I'm very, very jealous of that. For the honorable mentions part, can I talk some Tyron Smith for a second, because he just makes the honorable mentions as the first guy off this top 10. And we talked about Andrew Thomas and his injuries. I think Tyron Smith is another one that comes in where he is because of injuries. I think you can make a case that he should be here somewhere on the list because of when he's out there. I think he's without a doubt like a top 5 player at the position. Um, but I understand like Andrew Thomas being a few spots lower because of his injury history. Maybe it's the same thing from Tyron Smith, but I thought he probably would have sneaked on this list in the back half somewhere.
Yeah, I could have seen him making it on there, but at the end of the day, I think it's difficult for a lot of tackles to make a top 10 list because there's not 32 starting jobs, there's 64, right? It's left tackle and right tackle all grouped in here. And so I think that's inevitably going to make some tough cuts. Like even Teron Armstead not being on this list is also a tough cut. There's quite a few that you could probably bring up. And at the end of the day, all 10 of these guys on the list definitely deserve to be there, I would say. And Tyron Smith, again, it's more about availability than it is ability. There's been so many injuries that have piled up over the last few years. So it's tough to confidently say that he's better than some of these other guys who have been on the field and putting out their best effort year in and year out on the list.
Yeah, and it's not like a major gripe. Like this, again, a little nitpicky of saying that I think he could be there on the back half. And, he's the first name mentioned as an honorable mention. It's going to come down to health for him. And I don't expect him to play a full season for the Jets this year. And luckily they seem to take every precaution with drafting Olu Fashanu, and they have, Carter Warren, who's someone that they like, that they drafted last year in the 4th round. So I'm glad the Jets kind of aren't like, hey, we're expecting this guy who hasn't played a full season in a decade to come in and just be our guy. And not have any contingency plan. So I think that was a wise thing from the Jets this offseason.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the way that they protected themselves while also protecting their quarterback was very important and well done by Joe Douglas to have a short-term and a long-term solution at some of these offensive line spots. Very important, and sets the Jets up not only for a nice 2024 campaign, but 2025-26 as well.
A good question from Peter here. He says, do we think that these larger body tackles will ever be healthy regularly for all these teams? And, it's something that Jeff fans bring up a lot because, they just went through it with Mekhi Becton. And there was some, concerns about some of these other offensive, like JC Latham in this past draft. So what's your stance on the bigger offensive linemen?
Well, if we're going based on Eric Flowers, who was a huge offensive lineman that dealt with a lot of injuries and was never good, or if we're going with Evan Neal, who's also a huge offensive lineman who's dealt with a lot of injuries and has not been good, I do think that you could say, and Mekhi Becton, there are a lot of examples out there where these big-bodied offensive tackles can't stay healthy. And then some of these guys who are maybe undersized at the position or the normal size for the position, they do end up staying a lot more healthy. I don't think that Andrew Thomas is lumped in with that group, though. He's not really a big body. I think that he's pretty normal size for an offensive tackle. He's not the size of an Evan Neal or an Eric Flowers. But I do think there is quite a bit of at least anecdotal evidence that Giants and Jets fans can point to and say, these big guys don't succeed. Like they don't pan out. They deal with too many injuries, and they also have too many weaknesses in their game that allow them to get beat down by opposing pass rushers. So, yeah, I think that there is a real reason to argue that these big body tackles just don't work in the NFL.
Yeah, for Thomas, 6'5", 315, he's listed as, that seems like pretty average size. And I'm with you. I'm kind of, maybe it's recency bias because of what happened with Mekhi Becton, but I'm kind of scorned from that. And I'm okay with them going, like, for instance, in this past draft, the Jets go instead with Olu Fashanu, who's more like that athletic technician as a pass protector rather than that like big, huge mauler in the run game as a pass pro guy. So I'm good with that. And again, I kind of agree with you. I think it's definitely a risk that these teams are taking with some of the bigger offensive linemen. Anything else on this offensive tackle ranking or your guy Andrew Thomas before we keep it rolling here?
Yeah, I'll just say I think that the Giants invested a lot in Andrew Thomas last offseason. They made him one of the highest paid offensive tackles in the NFL. They're not going to see returns on that investment until he stays healthy. And he needs to be on the football field and he needs to remain available for the Giants. And I know that he hasn't missed a ton of games with injury throughout his career. So you'll have fans that are going to point to it and say it's just last season that he missed time, significant time with injuries. He missed like 1 to 2 to 3 games as a rookie and sophomore. And okay, I get all that, but he's been playing through injuries a lot throughout his career. I admire him for that. And I think it's great that he fights through and he puts himself on the football field and still plays at a high level. But staying completely healthy and not battling through significant injuries every single year does need to be the point of emphasis for him going forward, because the Giants have invested so much. To get a product, a half-baked product of Andrew Thomas on some Sundays can be really detrimental to an offense that relies on him so much.
Is Evan Neal a top 64 tackle in the NFL?
No.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Unfortunately, the Jets didn't have one last year. I think off the top of your head, where are you putting Morgan Moses? Somewhere in like the 20s, maybe
20s, 30s for sure.
Yeah. Right, which is fine, average starter. But I don't know if they started our other guy, Illuminor. I think he's closer to being a top 40 offensive tackle in the league. I'd rather see them go that route, but it doesn't seem like that's the case.
I would agree with that. I would love to see them go that route. I know over on Fireside Giants, Alex is a huge proponent of that. He's like really pissed off that Jermaine Illuminor has been slotted in there at left guard and Evan Neal is just continuing to have this right tackle job handed to him. And I'm in agreement with him. I think that the Giants really need to just push Jermaine Illuminor in there, take Evan Neal out, and start training Evan Neal at guard. It seems to be the only way, in my opinion, that they're going to save his career and save that investment of the number 7 overall pick in 2022. But we'll see how it goes. Again, training camp is next week, so we'll start to get some answers on this really shortly.
I wanted to get off into the new kickoffs, which we've talked a lot about since the new rules came out, the kickoffs. But there was an article this week from the New York Post with a quote from the Jets special teams coach, Brant Boyer. So I wanted to pull that up and get into it. When talking about the new rules, he said it's a big challenge with all these new rules. It's kind of wait and see. And you see what fits and what works and what kicks are best and who's doing it, all that stuff. It's a huge unknown. And then he follows it up. We've done nothing but study, and been in here almost every day, to be honest with you, trying to figure out what's going to work best. But nobody knows until you strap it up in the preseason games. So, obviously we'll get into our thoughts on the rule change, and we've talked about that a little bit already, but I kind of like this quote in particular from Boyer because he's so right. Like, it hasn't happened in the NFL yet, and we're not going to really know until we see it happen. And these coaches, they might have their theories on what's going to work best, but we're not going to have any clue until those first couple preseason games. And I think the teams who have very good special teams coordinators or over the years, very good special teams units are going to be at an advantage over some of these teams who maybe struggle a little bit on specials.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to highlight the preseason as being a way to kind of trial and error a lot of these things. Like treating it as a wait and see deal is probably the right approach because you can study all the film and, like Peter just said, plenty of XFL film to use to judge how it works. There is a lot of evidence as to how this is going to look on the field, but at the end of the day, you're talking XFL talent versus NFL talent. So we get an idea of what it's going to look like, but we don't have an idea of how it's actually going to play out at this level of competition. So a lot of those plays that they were running in the XFL, like we've seen these really electric handoffs and reverses that they were doing on the kickoffs a couple of years ago in the XFL, those might not work in the NFL because everybody is faster, stronger, and smarter in the football level. So it's just going to be tough to really visualize and conceptualize what these teams are going to be able to accomplish until we start to see it on the football field. And again, that's one of the reasons that preseason is more exciting this year. It's really exciting for me because I get to watch Tommy DeVito play, but it's also really exciting for all NFL fans because we have something brand new to take a look at and see how it's going to play out in the preseason. Maybe it's a complete disaster. Who knows? And maybe everybody gets concerned going into the regular season, or maybe it adds a bunch of touchdowns into the preseason, gets everybody hyped up, and generates even more excitement for the upcoming regular season. That's also a possibility. So the preseason is going to be a lot of fun to keep an eye on special teams for once this upcoming year.
Yeah, and I know you feel the same way. Like diehard football fans, they love it, and the guys who are in on the football news every single day of the year, and they know the 85th guy on the roster who's fighting for a roster spot, UDFA, and they want to watch them. And maybe for the more casual fan who isn't that in deep with it, and they watch the regular season, they're not as into the preseason. But as you mentioned, this year in particular, like there's rule changes. So I think it is going to be important for even the casual fans to watch and just see the difference and, what's going to work and what's not going to work. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of trial and error in the preseason, and that's okay, because that's when you got to, figure out what your plan of attack is going to be in the regular season.
Yeah, and I think it also opens up a lot of potential roster battles around the league, not only for the kick return specialist role, but even some of the new ways that you're going to see blocking on the new kickoffs. I think that it's going to change roster construction in a few ways. And I do think that, unfortunately, a lot of those back end of the roster guys who would normally make it because of special teams might be losing their jobs, because I think that teams are going to look at this new kickoff rule as a way to give their stars a few more opportunities to touch the ball and create big explosive plays. Like, for example, if the Giants want to put Malik Neighbors back there to return a kick, and he does, and he cracks a touchdown, they're going to do that more often. And then some of those other guys on the back end of the roster that only make the team for special teams are going to see less usage and ultimately going to lose their spot. So I do think it's going to have a big domino effect on the way that rosters around the NFL are constructed if it works successfully. But we do have to see it on the football field first before NFL teams start to get there. But again, with this preseason, they're going to be keeping a close eye on that. And maybe at the end of the preseason, when we get to those regular season cuts, those final roster cuts, maybe we do see some of those kind of fringe roster players suffer as a result of this new rule.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point to see, like, are they going to put, for the Giants, like a Malik Neighbors, or for the Jets, like a Brees Hall or someone like that back there, hoping for an explosive play. Right now, looking at the depth charts for the Jets and the Giants, the Giants kick returner right now is listed as Tyrone Tracy. And for the Jets, it's Xavier Gibson, who was their returner last year. Do you anticipate Tracy being the main kick returner, or is that something that you think is up for grabs here a little bit in training camp?
I think it's 100% up for grabs. I don't think that Tyrone Tracy should be projected as having that job right now. Gunnar Olszewski was our kick return specialist last year that we signed midway through the year. He returned a punt for a touchdown against the Rams. He's going to maintain his role as the punt return specialist. I imagine they're probably going to give him the first crack at the kick return specialist because they did sign him to a 1-year extension this offseason and gave him a decent amount of money to be a core special teamer for them. So I think Gunnar Olszewski should be penciled in there as the primary kick return specialist right now. But then I also think you could see Eric Gray, second-year, fifth-round running back, have the crack at the job ahead of Tyrone Tracy because he returned kicks and punts last year. Now, they did end up taking him off of special teams at some point because he wasn't really thriving in that role. But with the new formatting and how it's kind of similar to taking a handoff now for running back Eric Gray returning these new kicks, it could be a little bit interesting to see if maybe he has more of a spark and more of an impact now in that role versus what he did last year in that role. So I actually think Eric Gray and then Tyrone Tracy, but I would love to see Tyrone Tracy back there. He's really hard to tackle. All the stats show that he's one of the best tackle breakers in this draft class. So if he gets a crack at it, I do think there's a good chance he runs away with it.
Yeah, I think it's on the Jet side of things. Xavier Gibson's going to get the first crack, but it is a open competition. At least that's what the Jets and Robert Saleh were saying during OTAs and mini camp. They brought in a couple guys pretty much exclusively to be special teamers. For instance, at running back, they brought in Tariq Cohen, someone who was an elite special teamer at one point. So I'm kind of curious, again, like you brought it up a couple minutes ago, are the special teams only players going to either one, have a renaissance because of the emphasis on special teams and how important it's going to be, or are they going to have a hard time finding a job because maybe these teams want to put the ball in the hands of one of their more explosive players, again, for the Giants, like a Malik Neighbors type or a Brees Hall for the Jets?
Yeah, and I think that's completely possible because I think with the way that this format is set up, it really feels like a touchdown generating format. Like these are plays that could turn into explosive plays very quickly. If they're executed properly, these are all scoring chances now on the kickoffs, in my opinion. At least that's the way it looks with the new formatting. It's improved blocking, it's improved opportunities to get your receiving return specialist the ball and create a lane for him where he can just make one cut and he's gone. So I think that there are going to be more starters returning these kicks and making plays. And as a result, I think that it's actually going to have an adverse effect on the return specialist role compared to what we've seen in the past.
Absolutely. So we'll take a look at that. It's going to be something that's interesting to watch in training camp, as well as the many other storylines for both the Jets and the Giants. Last thing on the docket for today, our guy Daniel Jones, who is going into his year 6 leap season, was listed as a fantasy football sleeper this year at the quarterback spot. Are you cashing in and drafting Daniel Jones this year?
I cannot say that I am, but if it's a big league and, like a 20-man league and I'm running out of options for a backup quarterback, sure, I'll take a flyer on Daniel Jones. And when you read the article, it's pretty interesting, the PFF article that listed him as a sleeper. It's interesting to see the kind of line of thinking that they had, which is the weapons around him are improved outside of the running back spot. And as a result, he's going to be more productive throwing the ball. But they also make note of the fact that in 2022, when he was a top 10 fantasy quarterback, a lot of his production was on the ground. And I do think that it's difficult to envision him being a top 10 quarterback in terms of fantasy based on rushing coming off of the torn ACL. So it's kind of tough to conceptualize what this is going to look like for Daniel Jones this season in terms of fantasy football production. Is he going to be able to run the ball? Will he have any rushing touchdowns this year? I don't know. It's going to be really difficult, but expectations are high for some Giants fans and much lower for others.
To answer Peter's question, by sleeper, do you mean he will put us to sleep with his play? Do you think that's what they meant?
He's done that before, so it wouldn't shock me. I have absolutely fallen asleep during primetime games watching Daniel Jones play quarterback.
That's tough. But in his 2022 season, which is probably regarded as his best, 15 passing touchdowns. It was what, 22 total touchdowns, 708 yards on the ground. Do you think that is that enough to make him, like, I don't know, I feel like most leagues are 12 team leagues. Like, is that enough for you to be one of the top 12 quarterbacks from a fantasy perspective?
I don't think so. I think that he finished, I think it said in that article that he finished QB9 in that 2022 season, but to bank on him doing that is really tough. So I wouldn't bank on him being a starting quarterback for me. But let's say that I'm playing a league with a super flex and I need a second quarterback. So there's 24 quarterbacks starting in this league, or a 2 QB league. I think, yeah, you like to bank on that upside because he does have the potential with his rushing ability. But again, he was a top quarterback in fantasy that year because of his rushing production. I don't envision him doing that this year with that torn ACL that he's recovering from. So it's all going to rely on Malik Neighbors. So I'd rather bank on a Giants receiver like Neighbors or Wan'Dale Robinson in that draft slot than actually taking the quarterback who's throwing those guys the ball.
So I don't know how much stock you put into Fantasy Pros, but they have their rankings, already for fantasy football. And if you're looking at PPR, we have quarterback 26, Daniel Jones. So they have him listed as the 26th quarterback right now from a fantasy perspective. They have Jalen Hurts, QB2, Lamar. They put an emphasis, and more often than not, a lot of these teams, you either have to, in fantasy, you have to throw for buckets of yards or be able to run and add rushing touchdowns. So Fantasy Pros is not buying into the hype here with Daniel Jones as a sleeper. I don't know. This is going to be a tough sell for me. I'm not in after the little that we saw from him last year in his 5th year.
Well, we saw 6 starts, we saw a 1-5 record, we saw 6 interceptions, and we saw 2 touchdowns. those 2 touchdowns coming in a single game, I believe, both against Arizona. So yeah, it's a tough bridge to sell. Like, to tell anybody that they should believe in Daniel Jones this year. If I see Giants fans debate it online and get angry at other Giants fans, how can you not believe in him? Have you watched his 2022 highlights? It's just ridiculous. If you don't believe in this guy, you're totally valid and justified. And if you do believe in this big bounce back year 6 leap, you're probably the crazy one. And I think that's something that Giants fans do need to realize. Those 6 games that he put on the field last year were really bad. But hopefully everything is going his way this year. Hopefully the offensive line is better. Andrew Thomas is healthy. The playmakers are making plays, and Brian Dable is hopefully calling the plays this year. So maybe we will see this bounce back. I think that if you're going to point to one piece of evidence for Daniel Jones having a big year and potentially being a sleeper, you point to Josh Allen in 2000. And when did he have that breakout? 20, I think it was. His first 2 seasons, not that great. Brian Dable threw away the playbook and changed it, wrote a whole new playbook for him to match the strengths that he put on the field in his first 2 seasons. There was the big year 3 breakout, also coinciding with the year that they acquired Stephon Diggs for him. So maybe Brian Dable throwing away the playbook, redoing it, calling the plays this season, with Malik Neighbors being added to the fold, we could possibly see the breakout from Daniel Jones. Those would be the reasons that I point to. But at the end of the day, it's been a really tough 5 years with Daniel Jones. I'm not so sure that I can just put too much stock into it.
What do you make of Jaden Daniels, division rival quarterback, rookie quarterback, coming in as QB 13? That seems a little optimistic for me, even though, like, again, I just said it, like the running quarterbacks have a little bit of extra value, but 13 feels a little high for me.
Yeah, it's high for me as well. I think that team looks a little bit messy. Yeah, he's got a few playmakers, and he's definitely got the rushing talent and the ability to create that production, but he's a rookie at the end of the day, and we don't really know what Jaden Daniels' rookie season is going to look like. So it's definitely way too high for me.
Yeah, and I don't think that Washington team is going to be very good. So, yeah, that's a tough spot. I don't think I understand Caleb being where he is, right? Because he's going into a really good situation. Not necessarily the same thing for Jaden Daniels. So that's a tough one for me too. The rest of this list, I think I'm okay with, though. Anything else glaring to you on this Fantasy Pros quarterback ranking?
I guess on the Jaden Daniels, no, Caleb Williams should definitely be ahead of him, in my opinion. The playmakers that he has around him, the talent that he has, yeah, he should definitely be ahead of him.
Caleb is probably, I would think, a better example of a fantasy sleeper, right? Like someone who's maybe listed as a tier 3 guy right now who could jump into a tier 1 or tier 2 quarterback. Maybe the same thing with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I think the other 2 names that were in that PFF article, it was Daniel Jones and then it was Will Levis and Drake May. Where do they rank on this?
They are also very low.
Yeah, there's Levis at 24.
24 and Drake May 30. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're in that cluster below those other guys. Again, I don't know. Tough bridge to sell with both of them, especially Will Levis. I'm not sure how I feel about Levis. I think he's flashed some potential, but to bank on him having that big step forward this year and what seems to be, again, another messy situation for the Tennessee Titans, it's going to be tough to see.
That's the thing. Like the with those 3 guys in particular, Daniel Jones, Will Levis, and Drake May, I don't think any of those 3 are really in like this great spot where there's so much talent around them that they're going to be elevated, which is what I think would need to happen in order for them to have that fantasy leap.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with you on that. I think situation is everything for quarterback play. Quarterback play is very dependent on the success of the receivers, the success of the running game, the success of the offensive line, and the play calling. So I don't know if I really have these visions of Drake May with that group of playmakers and that offensive scheme having this monster rookie season. As much as I love Drake May as a prospect and as much as I believe in him being a long-term franchise quarterback, a big-time rookie season in terms of fantasy production, again, I don't necessarily see it. And I think you can make that argument against all 3 of those guys listed in that article.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything else on any sleepers here or final thoughts before we wrap up this episode on Monday?
Final thoughts. We're getting another Hard Knocks episode tomorrow. I'm excited to see what information we receive, and I know that it's going to kind of dive deeper into the Giants trading for Brian Burns. So I'm excited for that because the initial asking price was 2 firsts, and in the episode so far, they've mentioned 2 seconds, and they got it down to 1 second. So I want to see how that process unfolded. I think that's going to be exciting.
Absolutely. I am looking forward to the next episode of Hard Knocks. It's always going to be good. And looking forward to training camp next week. It's going to be right around the corner the next time we speak, which no second episode this week. I'm ramping up the move. So hopefully the next time we talk might be from a new studio. Going to be cool.
That would be really exciting. Can't wait.
Love it. That'll do it for us on this one, guys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Check out Anthony's work over on Fireside Giants. You can find me at Matt O'Leary NY. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we'll catch you next time.